Hello and welcome, loyal followers of the Tower, to another episode of Expanding Empires. So this one is another. It's not going to be list analysis. This one's going to be looking over the performance of Tau in the current meta and how you can make the most out of that army. I myself have done pretty well recently. I've gone 3-0, two RTTs back to back. Um, and I've played about 30 games so far into a pretty wide range of opponents. So I'm pretty happy playing the faction right now. I have no intentions of switching on to anything else. Um, but let's get started with the video. So, first of all, if I can get the right slide. Yeah, so obviously the Endos isn't good. It's not good. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to you and blow smoke up your ass and tell you, you just need to play it better, blah blah blah. It's not good. Everyone could see it wasn't good from the word go. It's not good. Doesn't mean you can't win with it, which I think has been demonstrated by a lot of people, to be fair. Um, but we're looking at a sort of 35 to 40% win rate. I think it's 35 on 40k stats, 40%, 39% ish on StatCheck, their website. They get data from different sources. So, um, in other words, it puts us as pretty much as a bottom four faction, right down there with Votan, Death Guard kind of range. But I say it depends on the week. In terms of play rate, we're looking at 4%, which is pretty much slap bang in the exact middle. So, more than Demons, Orcs, Shikari, but less than Thousand Sons, Necrons, and Tyranids. So, and of course, the obvious really good stuff. Your Eldar, Space Marines, the ones that are really popular and always really popular. Interesting to note, though, we are almost exactly the same play rate as Genestealer Cults. And a lot of people like to say Genestealer Cults are a rare to play army, but just as a fun side note, they're pretty much in the middle, exactly the same as us. So, um, yeah, it's not a good look for starters. It's not a good time to be a tower player, but that's okay. We just need to. Is the difference between being mindlessly positive and find the best in a bad situation. I don't own any other armies than Tau, so I'm going to keep playing Tau, and I'm not going to go buy another army because things aren't doing very well. I'm just going to do the best I can. My goal is always to be the best Tau player in the UK, and I'm not going to get there by playing Necrons or something. So yeah, so what's gone wrong, right? So I think the reasons that we're not looking at why we're not looking at a decent win rate is we're missing a lot of stuff in the book, primarily. Missing a lot of tools that the indexes have. So we got no zero CP stratagems like the Space Marines Captains give. You can use as a stratagem for a second time for zero CP. We don't have any of that. We just got the inferior version of use a stratagem for a second time at full cost from the Pure Side Engram ship. No reactive moves like the Skulking Heroes from Termagants. No move shoot move like Seraphim. We can't shoot back like Protocol of the Vengeful Stars or Reactive Reprisal, I think it is. It's called from AdMech. We don't have reliable CP generation. We do have like a bit of CP generation with Shadow Sun on fives and an Ethereal on fours. I wouldn't take that ever. It's just nowhere near reliable enough in a tournament setting. You need to be able to plan your turns and what you're going to do with your CP a turn ahead most of the time. And not knowing if you're going to have 3 or 2 CP is you just can't rely on that. It's nowhere near good enough 4 plus, especially when there's other factions out there or special characters out there that just give you 1 for existing. So yeah, no reliable CP generation, and there's almost no anti on any of our anti keyword on our weapons. There's a lot of good places it could go. The one that people say a lot is anti-vehicle or monster on railguns, which is basically a higher chance to get um, mortal wounds out. It could probably be anti-Titanic because you don't want it ruining the life of vehicle squadrons, like Sentinels and stuff like that. So I don't know if that's possibly a good thing. but it's not there, and a lot of other factions do have it. Um, so the other place I think would be good for it is burst cannons. I think burst cannons could use a little niche for themselves. So maybe an anti-infantry 3+ or something be quite good for them, just to give you a reason to take them. But all in all, what this comes down to is this stuff that we're missing. The fact that our stratagems aren't really the best, and the sort of lack of data sheet stuff. We got no tricks. There's no tricks. It's just literally you shoot stuff and it dies or it doesn't, and that's it. That's Tau. There's no tricks, and there's no auto win button, right? There's no devastating wounds on 4s with rerolls to wound. There's no combo like that. There's no super obvious thing that you do and you just delete an enemy unit, right? There's no fate dice with D cannons. There's no um, bolt of discipline on devastating marines. There's nothing like that. Which I say, this is a love it or hate it kind of situation. For me, I don't mind being in that point in that area. That's a challenge for me, which I think is fine. I don't mind playing into that challenge. Other people are going to hate it. There are various Tau-focused content creators, I'll not name any names, that aren't happy and aren't going to play Tau anymore, which is fine. I think playing a faction that's currently in the state of Tau is right now will make you a better player in the long run. So I don't mind playing this, especially since I'm still pretty early on in my 40k competitive career, relatively, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to play this, but I can totally understand why a lot of people aren't, especially if you're in like big teams, or if you're trying to win team events and stuff like that. Why you wouldn't want to do that, or you wouldn't want to, as in play Tau. Um, but yeah, it's just going to come down to the person. So what do we? That's the bad stuff, right? That's the negative stuff. Hopefully, we're going to go up from here. So, what are the unique selling points of Tau? What are the things they do well, right? Lone operative. We've got a lot of lone operative stuff. Some of it's better than others, but generally it is a lot of stuff you can put on the board if you want to. Ghost kills are the main one and the most important one by far, but the Firesight Marksman also very useful, Shadow Sun very useful, and Orn Var can be useful in the right situation as well. Then we got Ignores Cover. We can basically get Ignores Cover on anything in our army that we want it on. Any of our big hitters, you rarely have more than like 3 or 4 really big hitter units, and you can put Ignore Cover on that really easy with Marker-wise Marker Drones. Which is basically a +1 AP across the board, right? With cover so easy to get and so many people having it all the time, it's a really good thing to have the Ignores cover access. The thing that I think is most important about how that makes them different from other armies, though, by far, is the high volume of high quality range damage. A lot of people aren't prepared for this, I find, on the table, particularly if you're running Space Marines or Chaos Space Marines, Custodies as well. Those really elite armies that are running around with a unit that they think, oh yeah, no one's going to be able to kill me, and we can just drop down and delete that unit. It allows us to do things that most other factions can't do, which is kind of like a making up for a weakness we have in other areas. This is a trick that generally only works like a couple of times, and then people start to play around it. But you can definitely catch people off guard if they're not expecting you to do certain things, to kill certain units. Can really surprise people. And then in conjunction with that is Mass Deep Strike. The ability to deep strike so many of our units is really helpful, particularly in the crisis unit. It allows you to pick a unit a unit that you feel like needs to die and kill it, as well as deep striking in things like stealth suits for objectives, Vespid for objectives, and the list goes on. But reserve play is a big part of Tau right now, I think. Really important. So how do we make the most of these things? So lone operative, using the untargetable units to score. The ghost kill is the big one. It can sit on a midfield objective and it won't die. So far in my 30 games, I have not found a single unit in any of my opponents' lists that have been able to one round a ghost kill on its own. It would take a minimum of 2 units to take it down. Toughness 8, 2 up armor, stealth drones, it just doesn't die. And a lot of the time it just gets ignored and it sits on the other side of the board and it just keeps racking up that primary for you. So useful. You can also do something similar with the Firesight Marksman. I prefer to keep him on my home objective because it gets attacked a little bit less. But there is the downside to that. He doesn't screen a very large area, so it is possible for people to deep strike in or come in on reserves near him and get rid of him. Ornvar is another one. He sort of stops that from happening a little bit by having the 2+ invulnerable save. He can hold the objective for a little bit longer, but ultimately it allows you to score primary and some secondaries safely with units that we're not using for our heavy damage output, and thus we can use them for the greater good observing. With the exception of Ornvar, he can't do that, but the other units can. Shadow Sun and Firesight Marksman team and the Ghost Kill. None of those are particularly good for the greater good targets because their weapons just they're either already hitting on 2s, in the case of Shadow Sun, rerolling 1s, or their guns just aren't very good, so they're not really worth upgrading in comparison to the other weapons we have. I'm sure there are lots of factions who would kill for strength 8 APT damage 3 6 shots at 36-inch range from a Ghost Kill. In terms of the ignore cover stuff, the easiest way to do this is just add marker drones to everything. Just make sure you got 1 marker drone in every single unit, and then whenever you need to spot for something, so if the enemy is destroyed your stealth suit units or your tetras or your piranhas, your ghost kills even, and you're running low on units to do your spotting for you, if you have broadsides, crisis suits or crisis commanders, they're a really good one for it. With a marker drone in there, just to give you that extra bit of ignores cover when you need it, and then you can use your coordinate to engage to apply that to multiple units, or give yourself ignores cover essentially. That can be really useful. So it is effectively +1 AP. Just marker drones everywhere. Everything gets a marker drone, and then that basically lets you you're playing into that strength without having to think about it so much, which is always good. In terms of the high volume of high quality range damage, your weapon choice is going to be really important. I'm going to go into that one on the next slide, but making sure that you're using the right unit for the right job to get the most out of it is going to be really important because, as I say, our units they're not particularly points efficient. I'm outnumbered in essentially every game that I play, even against the Custodies. So we haven't got a lot to work with. So everything that we do have, we need to make the most of. That also comes down for Deep Strike as well. Basically allows you to get the jump on the enemy. You get to get the first strike most of the time. Crisis is the big one, jumping on the preferred target. You can bring stealth suits in next to them to observe for them. You can fire and fade the crisis out to safety, 12 inches, because you can fire and fade after you've deep struck. And you can go onto an objective to steal an enemy objective. You can. There's a lot of utility if you're just getting out of line of sight. So that is very useful and definitely something you should make use of. I never ever start my crisis unit on the board. I highly recommend that you guys don't do that as well. So here we go, weapon systems, right. Cyclic ion blasters. Do not take cyclic ion blasters. It is a trap, I'm telling you. I know there are lots of very good players out there who are going to tell you that cyclic ion blaster is the best weapon. And mathematically, it is the best weapon. Because in 90% of scenarios, it will be the highest damage output if you overcharge it. The problem is if you overcharge it, you're going to kill a third of your unit. That's not what you want. Beyond that, if you don't overcharge it, it's not the best weapon. Sometimes it's not even the second best weapon. Having 66 shots is great. Right, it is great at damage 2 APT. The problem is that's either enormous overkill. You don't need 66 shots to kill basically anything in this game, especially not at that level of damage. But you also don't need the, the problem that you'll come up against is when you come against opponents that will use drop something like Armor of Contempt. Suddenly you're AP1. If you're firing against 2-up armor safe stuff, then you're going to have a real issue with actually getting damage through, or -1 damage stuff is another massive issue for the Cyclic Iron Blasters. Custodies are the big one that do it, especially since we don't have a Vect. But also Deathwing Knights do it as well. There are some vehicles that do it. Imperial Guard vehicles do it. I think some other knights do it. I'm not sure if that's just -1 AP. I can't quite remember. But yeah, there's a lot of situations, a lot of counterplay your opponent can do with just AP2 damage 2 that will just completely kill the points efficiency and usefulness of the Cyclic Iron Blasters. And the last thing you want is to come down and not do the damage that you need, which will happen a lot with Cyclic Iron Blasters. You'll either do way overkill, and you'll be wasting most of the damage there, or you're gonna. I mean, overkill isn't bad because we don't have any points values for weapons, but you are going to cut it close a lot of the time with the AP2 damage too, is what I've found, and I do not like that at all. I really don't rate the Cyclic Iron Blasters. I avoid them at all costs. I think there's two main options to go for. Plasma is the first one, and that's the one I go for most of the time. AP3 damage 3 means that even if you're against something with -1 damage or -1 AP, you're still pushing stuff onto 4-up invols. You're still killing stuff like custodies with shields or terminators with shields in with um, uh, two failed saves. And then that it gives you just enough shots, 21 for a 7-man unit, with the hitting on 3s and double exploding 6s. You can get enough weight of fire through there to kill a very large number um, of models, highly elite models as well, which basically comes down to this is what Tau is really good at. They're really good at preying on the small model count, small unit count armies that are going to try and stack check people, because Tau can pass that stack check on their guns um, by quite a considerable margin a lot of the time. So, for example, against Custodies, it's really good. For example, on the weekend, I had a unit come down, kill 7 Custodies. They rezzed one. Killed 5 Custodies. They rezzed one. I overwatched with the with single exploding 6s for Overwatch, and we killed another 4, I think it was. Getting 9 custodian wardens in a single wardens. The troop ones, the basic one. Killing 9 of those in a single round is so good. Not many other armies can do that, and it can break the back of a lot of elite armies. Same thing goes for Marines. If you got big units of Stern Guard, you can just delete those. Anything with a 3-up armor save 2 wounds, you just look at it and it dies. The Death Watch, a lot of their stuff dies to that as well. Terminators, anything that doesn't have 4 wound terminators or -1 damage, again, just evaporates. Abaddon's big unit, delete it. Obliterators goes, you don't have to worry about them. Elite stuff like that, really, really good for getting rid of them. The other thing you can go is Flamers. Flamers are the most efficient choice when dealing with Toughness 3 low armor units, even more than Cyclic Iron Blasters. The problem is they're very short range, and they are AP0 damage and only strength 4. They're a very specialized weapon. You are only going to see them if you've got to deal with GSC. If you know you're going to play against GSC, or possibly Tyranids, like Gaunt Carpet Tyranids, then I think you can justify the Flamers. But if it's not like that level, I don't think that it's probably worth taking. I think I would stick to the Plasma, because you get enough rate of fire to deal with stuff otherwise. But it is an option. One thing I would say with Crisis Suicide, I forgot to mention earlier, is just keep an eye out for people with very large model count armies, your GSC, Tyranids, they're the big two, who are going to cover the entire board and screen out everything, and you're not going to be able to come in. I would probably say GSC and Tyranids are probably our worst 2 matchups right now, of the ones that I've played so far. I haven't played every single faction quite yet, but I think those 2 are some of the worst. just because the sheer number of models stops you from doing what you want to do. They just move block you, which is not where you want to be with Tau. So second up, we've got the broadsides. I think heavy rail rifles are the way to go. The missile pods are kind of pointless. You can just take 3 missile pods on crisis suits if you want to take the high output missile pods. So I think the rail rifles are a unique thing that they bring. Are definitely more worth it. Something that often gets overlooked, I think, are the missile drones with weapon support system kind of combo. Um, Missile drones are better than shield drones, I think, for broadsides. 8 wounds is normally enough. The ninth wound, it can be good in a lot of situations. That's a nice breakpoint for damage. Damage 1, damage 2, damage not so much damage 3, but damage 4. It's very good for that as well. Or damage D6. There's various versions. But missile drones, because they're the only unnerved version of the missile pod, they're still at AP2, and you can combine them because they count as war gear. They're a weapon for the broadside itself, so you shouldn't think of them as drones. Think of them as like another shoulder weapon for them. 4 shot, strength 7, AP2, damage 2, that ignores hit modifiers with a weapon support system. Hitting on 4s, double and 6s, same as hitting on 2s. That's very good against elites. Just again, quantity, sheer quantity of shots you're putting down board is just what's going to win you games. So start off the shield drones, missile drones are what you want. Lastly, you got Seeker missile or plasma. I think don't do the SMS. Indirect's not a thing. Don't worry about it. I prefer Seeker missiles, but plasma is totally fine in a lot of situations too. And then lastly, got vehicles. I think people are sleeping on the vehicles a lot. Hammerheads and Skyrays, I think, are both really good. I would take 2 vehicle holes minimum in my games. Toughness 10 is with 14 wounds. It's really hard to bring down. I think Skyrays, Hammerheads are good in the sense that they're reliable. They will very often just get you a wound through, get through to your opponent's save, because they hit on 2s rerollable, they wound on probably 2s rerollable, and they can AP5 ignores cover. They're probably not going to get a save unless it's an invulnerable, which is where the problem starts to come in. If they start running that invulnerable save with a 4 up or even a 5 up, like it can just ruin your whole day. But if you do get that shot through against stuff that doesn't have vulnerable saves, your monoliths, your land raiders, so even lighter stuff like Eldar vehicles, stuff that doesn't have an invulnerable save, the hammerhead is really, really good with a minimum 7 damage. That's enough to deal with a lot of vehicles. I think the Skyrays are a little bit better. Particularly in the current meta, the reroll full hits against fly is so useful, especially on Overwatch, because you're hitting on 6s. 6s are 2 hits with the full rerolls. That applies to the underslung weapons as well, which will normally be accelerated burst cannons. It just means Skyrays get a huge number of hits on flying units, and particularly on Overwatch. They're really good against things like Inceptors that want to jump in onto your backlines. You can just delete those units, no problem, with an Overwatch. But they're also just generally useful, even if you're not against flying opponents, which I haven't been recently, playing against a lot of Space Marines or Chaos Space Marines, because they have strength 14 is winning on 3s most of the time. You can get a reroll on that. If you have Shadow Sun in range, you can be in on 3s, you're rolling the 1s. But the 3 shots is important because it gives you more chances for sustained hits. So it's not unlikely that your Skyray fires and gets 5 hits on 3 shots. So again, we're leaning into the quantity of fire rather than the quality with the hammerhead for the Skyray, and that just allows us to put more damage downfield. Again, stuff that's hyper elite. You can build a list that's got nothing lower than damage 3, right? Like if you really want to, or damage d6 plus 1, kind of like equivalent to that, right? Which I think is a unique sort of little spot that Tau can sit in, and we need to lean into that strength if you want to pull out wins with this index. And then lastly, thing I want to say is planes are underrated. Sunstroke not so much. Sunstroke is pretty bad, but the Razor Shark is pretty solid. It does reroll It does get so it gets the +1 for the for firing at ground targets, and then so a lot of time it'll be hitting on twos. Um, you can make those reroll with Shadow Sun, or and then you have the Strength 8 that can be reading on twos a lot of time, or threes, rerolling the ones for a stealth suit team. Very reliable damage output. Very good at killing Marines, and that kind of level of infantry. But that's totally meta dependent, right? Because if you, for example, if you wanted to go flamers um, on your crisis suits, then you might have a gap where you don't have as much damage on your or strength or AP2 damage to you. That sort of ion damage output. If you're struggling for that or that kind of level, then the planes can be a good shout. They are very movable. They have the equivalent of towering, so they can see stuff very easily. So if you want to deal with stuff like Desolation Marines, you can do that. Um, but I think they do require a certain level of skill to play. I don't play them because it's too much work for me. I don't need to. I just run my list in a different direction. But if anyone was to run Razor Sharks, I don't think they're bad at all. Um, so yeah, I think that basically covers everything in regards to making the most with Tau. The one thing I want to leave you guys with is there's a lot of people out there I've seen on forums and YouTube videos and comments and blah blah blah, all that stuff, who seem to think that the Games Workshop design team hates Tau. Um, that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. I promise you, only players hate Tau. The design team does not hate Tau. I think you can blame what you want about not having enough time or skill or people for the job or whatever else. I think saying that the design team hates Tau and is intentionally making their index bad so that they lose more is silly. It's completely ridiculous. Even when I say it, I can't not laugh at it. Um, it's just the game is made by professional people at the end of the day, regardless of how well you think they do at that. Um, and they don't hire people who aren't obsessively loving for the game in all its forms. That's kind of a requirement for working at Games Workshop. So um, I, don't be don't be pulled into that negativity. If you want to get pulled into pull that, just play a different army and just save yourself the stress. Like don't worry about it. Um, I think the Tau army is definitely going to be a harder one to play, just because we haven't been given enough tools to pull out those wins easily, like other factions can. Um, but I think if you practice at it enough, you can definitely take people for surprise because we do things that most other people don't. And in general, I think you can pull out wins that people weren't expecting, which I'm hopefully gonna keep doing, and I'm hopefully gonna see a lot more people doing out there. Not because it's video, because who knows? I mean, I just like to listen to myself talk. But because people are going to be practicing, getting games in, learning how the game works. How the secondaries work, how to score games, what they can kill, what they can't. Um, and yeah, I guess that's all I have to say at that point. Um, so thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully soon I'll be able to come back with a couple of winning towel lists or top 10 placing towel lists. And we can discuss those. So until next time,